Last week, we read from Aurobindo about good and evil. As a universal principle, it's easy to understand that evil is either a good in the making, or as Aurobindo puts elsewhere, good disintegrating to climb towards a greater good. Because in the all wise providence of things, nothing is eventually a waste. As we have these four cycles, and as civilization goes through these cycles step by step and prepares itself for a greater uprising. So, evil is either good in the making, or it is good disintegrating, losing its pent up energy and force because it was imperfect, and passing through a temporary phase, a dark passage. It must emerge towards a yet greater, a wider formula of good. It's also easy to see how good itself is a shadow of what yet must come, either an obscure shadow or a brilliant one, like the gods of the overmind are brilliant reflections of the true gods. Gods of the overmind have a sense of separation, so they can quarrel, as the mother puts it. And we read last time the quarrel of the gods, but the gods of the supermind, they don't quarrel, they are united within them. They are constantly in a state of oneness. So even the high gods are a reflection of something still greater. It is easy enough also to understand that good is supported in its journey by some eternal good or truth towards which it is climbing through however difficult and tortuous route. We have that beautiful sketch of the mother, and now we have a replica also in Pondicherry, the ascent to truth, where we see truth is a strenuous and high conquest, difficult conquest. But in this conquest, good is supported by truth, by an eternal good towards which it is climbing. Similarly, it is easy enough to say, as Aurobindo says, we cannot remove evil without destroying much that is supported by that evil. So evil has its roots equally in some falsehood, something which has turned away from the light, from truth, and thereby entered into a state of utter darkness and oblivion. All these are easy to see from a universal standpoint. But the knot of the problem comes when it comes to individuals, knowing fully well that we are at one level of understanding nothing but instruments or slaves of nature. We are moved by nature. Much in us is automatic. Much of our physical activity is automatic. Much of our even psychological activity, unfortunately, is automatic. We don't have control over our thoughts, feelings, impulses, and we are driven by that. Yet, there is in man the law of evolution which spontaneously gives him the sense of a choice. Whether it is a real choice or an apparent one, or a real choice behind with an apparent choice in front, is a problem we can maybe read later on. But today, just to take out some passages from Aurobindo as to what is this element of choice in human beings, and how does it operate, and what are the consequences with regard to that. Because it's true that God is beyond good and evil, and it's also true that often He brings good out of evil. Aurobindo speaks of that when he writes in one of his letters to Mrinalini Devi, and also when he speaks of his Karavas, his jail, prison life, that how the divine, the all good, Sarva Mangalmay, brings good out of evil. Apparently it is evil that Aurobindo is sent to the prison, and it turns out to be a trysting ground for meeting with God. Is a most magnificent preparation for the kind of work he has come to do. And it is also true, as we have in that story of Garuda's compassion, that often the result of good turns out to be evil, or a misfortune at least. We have that beautiful story of Garuda seeing that little bird whom Yama has speared as he goes inside to meet Lord Shiva. And Garuda knows with his foresight that this bird is going to die in another half an hour. So this data Garuda has, and Garuda is very much moved by pity. Yama has seen, he has gone for a meeting with Lord Shiva. Sure enough, he will come out in half an hour and this bird is going to die. So out of deep pity, he picks up the bird on its wings. He is a mighty vehicle of Lord Vishnu himself, and takes it to the other side of the world and leaves the bird safe, tells it, don't worry, I know Yama's evil intentions, but I am there, Garuda, none else but the Vahana of the Lord Vishnu, and nothing will touch you here, and comes back. And sure enough, after half an hour of whatever time, earthly time or godlike time, Yama emerges out and is looking here and there for the bird. And Garuda tells him that, I know your intentions, but for a change you have met your match, and I have taken the bird to the other side of this world. How are you going to reach? And Yama says, strange are the ways of God. When I was going inside, I saw this bird has to die in half an hour, but on the other side of the world. And I had already sent my deputies to be there. But I was wondering, my agents are there and the bird is here. How is she going to reach there all the way? But then I moved inside, said, this is not my business. I have done my bit. Now the Kal Purush has to do his bit. And sure enough, Garuda becomes an agent of death while wishing to become an agent of life. So this is, from a certain standpoint, it is true that divine does that. He brings good out of evil for a greater good, and often he reaps the harvest of good out of apparent evil. But having said that, there is something like our choice and its consequences. It is this which is often popularized in rather crude and, as Aurobindo would say, vulgar notion of the law of karma. The crude and vulgar, the popular notion of law of karma is that if you do a good deed, whatever that is, remains unqualified often. If you do a good deed, you will be born rich, you will have plenty around you, you will always meet with success in life. And if you do a bad deed, you will, whatever little morsel of food you have in your hand will be taken away from you. You will be cast into the most difficult and terrible external situations and surroundings, as if God has no better business than to be not only a stern and exact judge, but also a strict and meticulous accountant. And Aurobindo at two places takes a dig at this popular notion. One is when he writes a letter to his sister Sarojini. He says, speaking of his stay in Baroda, he quotes this story of Judas, who as a compassion is told that 6 months you will burn in hell. But one day, out of kindness, the gods tell him that you can go to North Pole and put yourself on a cold sheet of ice. So he says, this story has always appeared to me as a strange kind of cruelty, because 6 months he has got used to that red heat of hell. Now when he goes to sit on the ice and then comes back again, it's like a punishment has become 10 times more. So he takes a dig at that and says that it's a strange kind of theory that people say, first you must suffer on earth for some good or bad you have done, or rejoice on earth. But later on, you will also have another recompense. You will further have heavenly rewards, which is fine. One doesn't mind being rewarded twice. But in no tribunal of justice, you are punished twice. So you are punished first here, and then you are punished elsewhere. You are sent to hell. So Aurobindo says this is obviously a very popular notion of the theory, and this is not how it is. The second is that God is a very just and mathematical accountant. And he says there is a strange story which came to light, which of course he is making fun of the story, that when a boy was dying, and he was dying of an illness, and his father had spent a lot of money on it, and yet the boy just won't be saved. And then toward the end the boy says, in my last birth, You had made me suffer like anything. You had stolen all my property and wealth. So this birth I have taken only to punish you. Now, this is obviously very, very crude theory, because truly if God is like this, and who has no better business, and if law of karma is only about reward and punishment, then it's not really worth anything much. So this is one of the nuttiest problem that has vexed mankind. Is there really a reward and punishment? Is there a law of karma at all? Because when we actually take cognizance of the facts of the world, we do see that often good men, seemingly good, who are honest, nice people, what we understand as humanly good, suffer. At the same time, we see that people who are outright, downright indulging in everything which, as a human being, now we are talking of a human frame, not beyond the frame where evil and good both move towards something high, that evil is often rewarded with greater and greater riches. So what is this law? Is there a law at all? Often the crude mind of man turns away with disbelief and dismay. Or else, if one is simply a believer, one says, no, the reward and punishment is not here, but elsewhere. Wait and see. When he dies and goes, he will be carried not by angels, but by some ghastly looking yamdutas, and he will be tortured like anything. These, of course, are very, very, as Aurobindo would tell us, crude notions. So what really is the law of karma, and how does it operate? Aurobindo speaks of 4 pillars of the law of karma. The first, that there is an action and consequence. There is no doubt about that, whatever it is. And he says this is a kind of fact that there is a kind of governance in this world. Whether we call it a divine governance or a governance of just order, but not the way we understand it. But there is a governance in this world, and it's not just chaos. So we are responsible for actions, and our choices bring forth results upon us. What those results are, he would not tell us now. But he says this is the first pillar of the law of karma. But if that is all, he says, then where is the freedom of the individual? There is a universal energy which is simply picking up things and giving back things. He says there is something like my own idea which can create the universe. In other words, the second pillar of law of karma is that I create my own universe. This is something very interesting, and it has come up in modern thought, that as I think, as I feel, I create my universe around it. It's very easy to understand. A man may be living 24 hours in an air-conditioned room, and yet he may be sweating because he's full of anguish inside. We have this famous story of Aurobindo, a dream, where the poor man is so happy, whereas the rich man is suffering all the time. He is having heartburn, he is having dyspepsia, he is worried about the income tax rate. Of course, nowadays income tax rate is regarded as something very honorable. So if you are raided by an income tax officer, your name goes up in the locality, that he is among the rich and the famous. But that apart, the fact is that we may be in the best of conditions, but we cannot escape our own private world which we have created by our own thoughts and feelings. Leave aside the actions. So this is the second pillar of the law of karma, that it becomes something intrinsic. The third, Aurobindo says that this idea, creating the world itself, is not enough unless behind it there is something more stable as a foundation, a bedrock, which chooses among the various ideas. And this, he says, is the freedom of the soul, which chooses the karma and the consequences. So many things that the ego does not like, the soul chooses. It says, I must go through this difficulty and even danger and disaster, because this is necessary for my progress. In fact, Aurobindo says there are 2 stages in which this progress takes place. One, when we are going through a schooling process, because this soul is tied up in dark obscurity of nature, it must test and understand things. So it is like a learning curve. So the soul gives sanction to a certain action of nature, takes a course and discovers, oh, this leads to that. Like a little baby who puts his hand in fire and learns that, well, fire can burn. The same baby, as he grows up, knows that fire can burn not only your flesh, it can be used for cooking. Then he grows up and he discovered this fire, it's a tremendous energy. If you understand its principle, then it can give light to the whole world. So this is an evolutionary process in which the infant soul tests the limits of nature, understands its ways and processes, and eventually graduates towards a free being. But in the next stage of the karma, it begins to enter into this law with a will to change, with a will to bring new forces into this universe. So Sri Aurobindo speaks of two lines of karma, two stages of evolutionary journey. And finally he says that beyond the soul, the idea and the law of action and reaction, there is the spirit who is forever free. And it is possible for our soul to develop to a point where it can unite with the eternal freedom of the spirit and be free as the spirit in us is free. So these are the four pillars. And how do they operate? I'll take out a passage or a couple of passages. This is, again, we are reading some of his early writings. And this is an series of essays, The Problem of Rebirth. It's really very, very beautiful and detailed account of the entire process of rebirth. And here Sri Aurobindo takes all the objections even of the materialistic theory that look, you talk of rebirth and karma, but this is pure heredity, this is because of genes, this is because of this. And he gives us a beautiful understanding without ignoring this data. So he would tell us that the soul chooses a heredity. It decides to go through a certain experience. Given the same situation and circumstances, one man remains free of an affliction and the other develops it. So he takes all these factors into account. But we will read just a few portions from something which often vexes the human mind, karma and justice. So what really is justice? If truly what we call as so-called bad man, really enjoying life, and the so-called good man suffering. So where is the justice? So, from Sri Aurobindo, karma and justice. First, it is sure that nature has laws of which the observance leads to or helps well-being and of which the violation imposes suffering. But all of them cannot be given a moral significance. So the law of karma is not just moral, it operates at several levels. I may be a very moral man, but if I smoke cigarettes, I will develop a lung infection. I am likely to develop. This is a very easy thing to understand. That my morality is not a guarantee against my physical well-being if I do transgressions at that level. So he says not all of them have a moral significance. Then there is the certainty that there must be a moral law of cause and consequence in the total web of our weaving. And this we would perhaps currently put into the formula that good produces good and evil, evil. So there is some bit also of the moral side. So if we keep hurling our ego against the universal law, this rebounds and sometimes falls back upon us in a terrible way. And the theory is like this, that if we throw a stone, it is bound to rebound back upon us. If you throw mud, it is said that never try to throw mud towards the sun, because only for a moment the sun will be clouded, but the mud will fall back upon our own head. So there is something like a rebound, but it is not the whole of the law of karma. It is only a small bit, which is a proportion of undoubted truth. Though also we see in this complicated world that evil comes out of what we hold to be good. And again out of evil comes out what we hold to be good. And again out of evil disengages itself something that yet turns to good. So in this world it's not so simple and straight that if you do good, good will come out, and if you do evil, evil will come out. So this is the second aspect. Perhaps our system of values is too rigidly precise or too narrowly relative. The formula is true, but is not the whole truth, at least in its first superficial significance. So there is a truth in this, but not the way we understand it, because we value external reward. So we think that if a person is leading a honest life, he must get external reward. And because we are so much moved by external suffering, we may think that the punishment is an external snatching away of external things. And even now we see this all the time. Say, if a person, the child is going abroad for studies or has got a good job, we say, "Oh mother, how beautiful, how gracious, it's your grace." But if a child has a beautiful thought, a noble aspiration, maybe an aspiration to, walk into the jungles and serve some poor people, we would wonder, we would send the person first to a counselor. If the counselor doesn't help, we pray to God that please take away this stupid thought in his head. At least let him first have become a rich man, successful man. Maybe afterwards, when he is retired, then he can take to this kind of thought. So even now, we don't value the inner things. We still feel that this is more valuable than the other. So it is our valuation and not God. In the ordinary notion of karma, we are combining two different notions of good. I can well understand that moral good does or ought to produce and increase moral good, and moral evil to further and to create moral evil. Now this is logical, that if I give love, the power of love should increase in me. This is understandable. But if I give love, then everybody should, be very nice to me. This is not necessary or true. In fact, often it may be the other way around, as Aurobindo remarks in one of his letters, that Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar once observed when somebody told him, "I have not done, why these people are against me? I have not done any good to them." So sometimes when you do good, you may get evil as a result. Yet, one must do good, not because of the result, but because it increases the power of goodness inside me. So he says, this is understandable. The habit of love confirms and enhances my power of love. So it is not because others will love me, or I'll become a popular person, or they will say, "What a good man," or I will start getting rewards from God. I may get none of these things. But if I am good inside, if I have cleared my heart of all hatred, jealousy, ill will, then within me there is a purification, the increase of Sattva-guna, and as Sri Krishna would tell us, there is a growth of happiness, sukham, and prakasham, light inside me. That is the moral reward. The habit of hatred, on the contrary, corrupts my being, because those whom we hate, they for a moment are affected. After a while we get isolated. But we are still surrounded by the web of hatred that we have spun around ourselves. This is the unfortunate part, that when we are full of hatred, jealousy, ill will, more than anyone else we are surrounded by it. And we suffer that. Fills it with poison, with bad and morbid toxic matter, and opens it to the general power of evil. So, the more I indulge in evil thoughts, evil feelings, I become open more and more to the universal evil. And the only result of universal evil is to depress me, to cut me off from my own inner truth, to cut me off from light and happiness. This is what Mother has explained in the same way. She has explained it like an analogy of a flower. She says every good deed is like a fresh breath, something to this effect. And just as a beautiful breeze makes the flower blossom, so every good deed that we do helps our inner being to blossom. Whereas every deed which is full of selfishness, he especially used the word selfishness, and Aurobindo has said selfishness and meanness are the only vice. And every selfish act, every time that we are mean and turn back upon ourselves, she says it's like a poison, like a toxic fume, and it wilts and shrivels us. So this is the law of karma. Still, we may well see and believe that love does throw out widening ripples and helps to elevate the world, while hatred has the opposite consequence. So both for myself and for the world, when I give out the force of love, it increases the power of love in the world. That's why one of the best ways to serve the mother, this of course my stupid thought, is to remain happy. Because if we are happy, we reduce at least one burden on the divine. That is the first step. Because if we are full of sadness, anger, then we are increasing that much load of the divine, because he has to work upon us. So one of the things, Mother has said something to this effect, that it helps the divine work in the world. But what is the necessary connection between this good and evil on the one hand, and on the other pleasure and pain? Must the ethical power always turn perfectly into some term of kindred hedonistic result? Just because I have been good, full of love, does it mean that every time I appear for an examination, I must pass in flying colors? He said, not at all. It may not be true at all. Not entirely, for love is a joy in itself. So the reward and punishment are immediate. When I indulge in love, my heart blossoms to joy. When I indulge in hatred, I shrivel inside. But also love suffers. Hatred is a troubled and self-afflicting thing, but has too its own perverse delight and its gratification. But in the end we may say that love, because it is born of the universal delight, triumphs in its own nature, and hatred, because it is a denial or perversion, leads to a greater sum of misery to myself or to others. So it is better to love and suffer, if suffering be the count, than to hate and suffer, if one wants to put it like that, because in one we are moving. And of all true moral good and real evil, this may be said, that the one tends towards some supreme right, the rhythm of the Vedic rishis, the highest law of a highest truth of our being, and that truth is the door of the spirit's ananda. So if we continue on the path of good and light and the right, one day we will reach that door, which will open and lead us to something that is beyond it, of which this is only a pale reflection. This is what we read last time, that good is a preparation for something yet greater. Out of a love where we are wanting, we would graduate to a love where we love without wanting, and from there we would graduate, or rather post-graduate, into a love where it is a self-existent reality of our own being. Next, Aurobindo tells us, we can see this much, that the good or the evil in me translates itself into a good or an evil action, which among other things brings about much mental and material happiness and suffering to others. There does still appear to be a principle of rebound in nature. Our action has in some degree the motion of recoil of the boomerang, and cycles back towards the will that has cast it on the world. So just because there is the principle that moral good leads to an increase in moral goodness, and moral evil leads to an increase in moral evil, does not mean that there is the other principle does not operate. It can operate. If I continue robbing people of not only their joy but of their material things, and acquires in external acts which would make others suffer, one day this may boomerang upon me in a most material and outer way as well. So this is the second thing that Aurobindo is saying. And in this context, Aurobindo has elsewhere given the example of, say, Genghis Khan. He says he goes across inflicting cruelty on others. So it is not that just because, it is a question of his own individual journey, it will boomerang. And this boomerang is a very dangerous and deadly boomerang. But this mechanical rebound is not the whole principle of karma that he has already revealed to us. Then he reveals that the relation of will to action and consequence must be cast on more subtle and liberal lines. So the law of karma, like all spiritual laws, is very subtle, and therefore human mind can easily misunderstand it or turn it into a very crude and gross formula, too rigid a formula. Oh, he must have done in last birth something bad, that's why he is suffering. I had two very miserable, out of many experiences of this kind. One, when a person had a injury because a truck had hit him. So one of the doctors who believed in the law of karma said while next to his bed, it must be his karma. So, it was a very sad thing to say, because poor fellow is suffering because of the truck man's karma. And, that truck driver is fine, he has gone scot-free, and it is he who has to bear the consequences of something which the truck driver has done and gone away. The second was even worse, when some gundas were threatening a couple. This, of course, is from the Air Force days. And when the matter went to the senior person, I happened to be the welfare officer, and I said, we must, immediately stop this matter and take care of this nonsense. And what is this? He said, no, he was again a soft-poing devotee. And he said, no, it is her karma. He called and counseled them like this. Don't take it like this. It must be, some karma because of which these gundas are coming. So these absurd things also can take place. So Sri Aurobindo is telling us that this is not how the law of karma operates. It's something very subtle, flexible and liberal. The universal spirit in the law of karma must deal with man in the lower scale of values only as a part of the transactions and as a concession to man's own present motives. So just as when a child is small, so the way we deal with a child is different. Sometimes we have to tell a child that, look, you have done this act, time out for some time. You are not going to get this particular little reward that you were getting. This is because the child's consciousness doesn't understand anything more. But when the child is not 5 but 10, we deal differently. When the child is 15, we deal very differently. When the child is 20, we say, look, you are free. You want to do it, and you get what you go through life, and you will get walk your own way, your own journey, and things like that. At 15, we will explain to him. At 5, we will probably just give certain consequences. So at different stages of our development, the divine also deals with us differently. And there is a very interesting little story where, a Pandits always live in, poverty. There is a very, Surdas is a very nice couplet to it, speaking of the law of karma. Of course, Gita puts it that, it's a gahan, karman gati, is very difficult to understand. So Surdas says it's very perplexing, Lord, to understand your law of karma. And he says, Murak Raj karat hai, Pandit firat bhikari, karman ki gati nari. That, the fools are reigning upon this world, are the sovereign masters, whereas the wise and the learned, they are moving with a begging bowl. And then he says that, Ujjwal pankh diye bagule ko koyal koi vidhikari. That the kingfisher who is full of deceit and cunning, you have made it so beautiful in looks. And this koyal who is so sweet and wakes up everybody with a melodious voice is so dark in complexion. He says, I don't understand your law. So Sri Aurobindo is revealing to us this subtle law from inside. And this is that at one level the divine uses our own stage of development, our own trust, our own evolution, and according to what we would understand, he gives us the reward and consequences, or he gives us the experience which will help us learn. But man mistranslates as a reward and punishment. But it's not a reward and punishment, but a consequence in the language we understand. So when our consciousness is crude, we understand a crude consequence. So when we are full of greed and we develop peptic ulcer, then we understand that, look, greed is not good, because doctor will tell us that, look, if you are greedy, you will develop peptic ulcer. We understand it. But as our consciousness becomes refined, then the moment we indulge even in thoughts of greed, something within us will feel that we are cutting ourselves off from that delight that we were experiencing. So this is how the law operates. At a crude level, there is a crude way. And this is how the universal spirit adapts itself. So this is something very, very beautiful that Sri Aurobindo is revealing to us. And at the second level, he says that this is taken away. So the next law operates is, the pursuit of truth may entail on me penalties and sufferings. At the first level, I may find that I do good and good comes, and I do evil and evil comes. Outwardly, materially. It's like Sri Aurobindo was asked, can we pray for material things? He says, yes, it is allowed. But why it is allowed? So that one day we begin to ask for the one who is granting us all these beautiful things. But at next level, those things that we were enjoying, the divine may take away, because he wants us to now be good and true for the sake of being good and true, and not because of external reward. So at the next level, the pursuit of truth may entail on me penalties and sufferings. The service of my country or the world may demand from me loss of my outward happiness and good fortune, or the destruction of my body. The increase of my strength of will and greatness of spirit may be only possible by the ardors of suffering and the firm renunciation of joys and pleasure. In the child infancy, he gives us nice, beautiful lollipops. When we grow, then even the lollipops we deserve and much more he takes away. Because he says, no, not for lollipops will thou act, but purely for the joy of doing this, for the sake of it. And he turns our attention within to observe how these deeds are affecting our own consciousness. The law of karma is therefore not simply an extension of the human idea of practical justice into future births, and a rectification there of the apparent injustice of life. A justice, or rather a justice, there must be in all the workings of the world energy. But in the life of man, there are many factors to be taken into the reckoning. There are two stages, grades, degrees. So, what is applicable at one point? An ignorant person goes and the same thing. One goes towards the samadhi, he doesn't know what is there, he picks up a bottle and keeps over the samadhi. He doesn't know because he's an ignorant man. But if we go and do it, it's an absurd thing because we are not expected to do like that. Similarly, when a child comes, he comes and runs around the samadhi. Sometimes they even speak loudly or run around the tree because he's a child, his consciousness doesn't understand. And we have to simply say, keep quiet. But if a grown-up person goes and speaks loudly, then it's a very different thing. So depending on the stage, which has to be taken into account, depending upon the development, depending upon the experience the soul is seeking, depending upon the present constitution of our nature and the past evolution, and depending upon the future towards we are moving, the karmic law operates. And then Sri Aurobindo gives us a very new idea of justice. If it is just that the virtuous man should be rewarded with success and happiness, that's how we believe, and the wicked man punished with downfall and pain at some time, in some life, on earth or in heaven or in hell. It is also just that the strong man should have the reward of his cultivated strength, the intellectual man the prize of his cultivated skill, the will that labors in whatever field, the fruit of its efforts and its works. So a man in a competition, it is not the morally good who succeed, but the intelligent man. In a WWF wrestling, it is not the good man who will win, but one who is stronger, because strength is also divine. And if somebody has cultivated his strength, he deserves to win. If somebody has cultivated his intelligence, he deserves to get success. So Sri Aurobindo is turning this law into another way of looking. But it does not work rightly, you say, not morally, not according to the ethical law. But what is right working in this connection? I may be religious and honest, but if I am dull, weak and incompetent, and I may be selfish and impious, but if I have the swift flame of intellect, the understanding brain, the skill to adapt means to ends, the firm courageous will fixed on its end, I have then an imperfection which must impose its consequences, but also I have powers which must make their way. The truth is that there are several orders of energy and their separate characteristic workings must be seen. And finally, karma and consequence draw their meaning from their value to the soul, because the soul can turn the consequences into a supreme good. Even what is regarded as a disaster, because it has come back as a karmic consequence, the soul can turn it into a supreme good simply by taking a right attitude. And that's what eventually is the last word on the law of karma. They are steps by which it moves towards the perfection of its manifested nature. So, there is a beautiful line in Savitri, there is a freedom in each phase of fate. What is that freedom? I may not have had the freedom to choose, and I am driven by nature. But when the consequences comes upon me, if I adopt the right attitude, that becomes a grace. And that's what Mother has said elsewhere, that my child, what are my blessings? They are meant to take you through the shortest path towards the fulfillment. They do not mean that always good things will happen. Very often people think that because Mother had blessed a marriage, so it should be happy. Probably it may be the other way around, so that one gets the experience very soon and learns to love the divine truly. This has actually happened, so it is not just a story. So he's saying it is the journey of the soul. And even when this object is won, our action need not cease, for it will keep its value and be a greater force of help for all those others with whom in self we are one. So the law of karma does not end with the freedom of the soul towards which it is moving through this complex maze. So very often people say the law of karma operates till you are caught in the cycle of birth and rebirth. When you are free from karma and no further action, and you are free from rebirth. Aurobindo says it may not cease. You can engage now in the world as a Jivan Mukta for a greater good, for a greater becoming. Because now you take upon yourself not just your burden, but the burden of all others. A small little story, we can stop. Just a small little story about Nalnida. Somebody told me that when he was in the nursing home, then one day someone, he was by his side and wondering why he has to go through suffering. Why should someone like Nalnida, go through this chest pain and all these things? So in that process, while being near, this person fell into a kind of trance-like state, meditative state. And after a while, he suddenly came out and he saw that Nalnida was looking at him intently, sitting and looking at him intently. Nalnida made this remark, something to this effect, that sometimes one has to take upon oneself global karmas, the consequences of the earth. So that is the higher line of karma, something to meditate upon. We'll stop with that.